So my random thought this morning as I'm leaving the gym is related to a recent episode that I put out with Kaylin Kane. It's episode 53 on the Enneagram. And for those of you who know the Enneagram, it's kind of a personality test, kind of a thing, but what it's really trying to get at, rather than behaviors, it's trying to get at underlying motivations for behaviors. And so one of the lessons you learn, we discussed this more in depth in the episode, of course, but one of the lessons that you learn from studying the Enneagram is that oftentimes looking at a person's behaviors is actually a pretty bad metric to use to judge what their motivations are. And the reason I'm bringing this up, and because I'm thinking about this, is I've seen a few posts of some friends and some colleagues recently on social media that are kind of scratching around this issue in asking questions about the quality of online conversations when people disagree. You know, what should your line in the sand be with someone who agrees with you or disagrees with you? And what are ways, is it even possible to have a good conversation online when two people disagree? Can we ever change each other's minds? All of this. And I've got obviously some thoughts about that because it's something that if you are a listener to my show, you hear me talk about this a lot. It's one of the underlying motivations. Again, back to Enneagram thoughts there, like what motivated me to start the podcast in the first place. And this is actually one of them. It's one of those things that motivated me in the beginning to try to do this show, and a show that has the format of as close as you can get on the internet to actual conversations back and forth between two people where you have a chance to hear tone of voice, see a little bit of body language, see the other person as a human, because it's easier for our brains in that case to see the other person as a human and not as a political abstraction on the other end of a faceless Twitter exchange or Facebook exchange or whatever it is. And that is so important. And so when you're entering those, at least this is how I see it, and this is how I try to govern my time in online conversations, is number one, I enter each of those with the assumption that I could be wrong. And it doesn't matter what the topic is. A lot of times you bring up these things on Facebook and you get responses back, well, yeah, sure, I'm happy to disagree with someone and think they're a good person as long as they don't disagree with me about racism. Okay. I think that's extremely limited. You can keep that perspective, but here's the thing. Very few people, if we're looking at behavior and not motivation, I said that backwards. If we're looking at motivation and not behavior, very few people think that their perspective is hateful and racist. Okay, so you might think that they are, but they don't. They think they're doing good. Most people are at the very least good in their own perception of themselves. So here's the problem. If you're talking to someone who thinks that their way of looking at it is actually beneficial to others, and that their way of looking at it is moral and just and, not racist, and you are unwilling to engage with them with any humility that it's possible that you might be the one who's missing some perspective here, and the habit is to put words in their mouth to straw man their positions so that you look good in that conversation, then no, there is no way to have good conversations online. So, and I don't really care what the issue is. Racism, usually, I just bring that up because that's the one that usually gets thrown out first as, yeah, sure, it's fine to disagree on this or that or the other thing, but when it comes to human rights, or, these are just those cliches that people throw out there. The problem is, there are tons of ways that people could explain and conceive of and brainstorm solutions for human rights issues that don't have to all match in order to still be on the same team. I've done an entire episode about this back in February, the little mini-series that I did. It was the Choral Music, the Human Art Form series. I spent quite a bit of time going into the concept that there are different approaches that could be used to get at the problem of inequities in society. the social justice or the critical social justice lens is one of those. It's not the only one. However, if someone says, I see where you're going with that, but I think there are some limitations to the lens you're using to look at that. The improper response is to then say, well, then you're racist. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about. This is the reason we have these problems online. These conversations go much better when you're having them between two people that see each other as humans, and they could disagree, but they could see through those social cues that the other person is still motivated by good things and they want good things. It's just that their perspective might be limited. But guess what? So is yours. Everybody's perspective is limited by definition. That's what perspective means. It's like, I've got my eyes and I see this way, right? I can't see from where you're standing. The only way that we have any hope of getting any information from anyone's perspective other than our own is through conversation. If we don't agree, we really have a very limited number of choices as a society. If I can't make you do what I want you to do, so let's say I've got some policy and political policy that I support, right? And you don't agree. You don't want to do that thing. I have very limited options. I could talk to you until I've persuaded you to agree with me, and then you voluntarily do that thing. Or I can force you. I mean, obviously, I know which one I'd prefer. And most people, if they turn the lens on themselves, they'd prefer not to be forced to do things. Okay? So the third option is walk away. Okay? But then obviously we lose a ton as a society when we separate ourselves into our echo chambers of people who are just like us. These are the two of those three things are negative outcomes. With the persuasion option, the worst outcome is that you end the conversation agreeing to disagree. Okay? And that's okay. So the moral of the story, because I'm almost home now, the moral of the story for me, and this as I think through these problems, I choose, when I engage with people online, to assume that I could be wrong, to assume that everybody knows something that I don't know. Everybody's got something from their perspective that I haven't seen before, and at the very least, even if my goal is not to convince the person, like, I don't want to necessarily need to win the argument, but I do want to convince the other person that there could be something that they're missing. And so in order to convey that, I have to enter the conversation with that same humility. There could be something I will learn from this conversation, something that I didn't know before that I now can take forward into my next conversation. It's an expansion of my perspective to include little bits of other people's perspectives. And since we cannot be omniscient and know everyone's perspective all the time, we can't know someone else's motivations unless they tell us, at the very least, we can try to expand our perspective little bits at a time with every conversation we have. If that's your goal when you enter Facebook conversations or Twitter conversations or whatever, or real life conversations, if that's your goal, then you can have good conversations online with people who you disagree with. But as soon as the accusations start, the conversation stops. And that, from just a pragmatic standpoint of, if you believe in the thing you're advocating for online and you want to make the world better, blasting people out of the conversation so that they will never talk to you again is a really bad way to do that.